The ships came from the darkness between stars like moving mountains made of crystal and metal. Hyun-woo Kim watched from his apartment window in Seoul as the massive vessels blocked out the sun. Their hulls gleamed amber in the morning light, beautiful and terrible at the same time. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts in dozens of languages. Military jets screamed overhead, but their missiles bounced off the alien ships like raindrops. Within hours, every major city on Earth fell silent under beams of strange blue light that made people collapse where they stood. Hyun-woo had served 8 years in the Marine Corps. He knew when a fight was over before it began. These beings, whoever they were, had technology that made Earth's weapons look like sticks and stones. When the blue light swept through his building, he felt his muscles lock up and his vision fade to black. He woke up in a metal cage. The creatures that had taken them called themselves Kelvins. They stood nearly 3 meters tall with pale blue skin that seemed to glow from within. Their eyes were large and dark without pupils that humans could see. They wore robes that shifted color like oil on water, and when they spoke, their voices seemed to come from inside people's heads rather than their mouths. "You are now property of the Kelvin Empire," the voice said, as thousands of humans huddled in massive holding pens aboard the ship. "You will be sorted by your abilities and assigned work duties. Compliance brings food and shelter. Resistance brings pain and death." Hyun-woo looked around at the other prisoners. Men, women, and children from every nation on Earth sat in shocked silence. Some wept quietly. Others stared at nothing with empty eyes. A few, like him, watched their captors and memorized everything they could. Next to him sat a young woman with short black hair and grease under her fingernails. She introduced herself as Yoon-ji Park, an engineer from Samsung. On his other side was Jae-min Lee, a doctor who had been working at Seoul National University Hospital when the ships arrived. Across from them, a woman named So-young Choi sat with her arms wrapped around her knees. She had been a pilot for Korean Air. "They're scanning us," Yoon-ji whispered, pointing to the strange devices the Kelvins carried. "Some kind of brain scan, I think. They're looking at our memories and skills." The sorting process took 3 days. Humans were divided into groups based on what the Kelvans found in their minds. Engineers like Yoon-ji went to one area, doctors like Jaemin to another. Pilots like So-young were grouped separately. Soldiers like Hyun-woo found themselves with other military personnel, police officers, and security guards. A Kelvin overseer, taller than the others with silver markings on its robe, addressed Hyun-woo's group. "You have experience with violence and weapons. This makes you useful but dangerous. You will receive neural dampeners to control your aggressive impulses." The neural dampeners were small devices implanted behind the left ear. The procedure was quick and efficient, done by machines while the humans were held motionless by the same blue energy that had conquered Earth. When Hyun-woo woke up, the world felt different. Colors seemed duller, sounds were muffled. Most importantly, the burning anger he felt about his situation had cooled to a distant ache. He tried to feel rage about what had happened to his planet, his people, his life. The emotion was there, but it felt weak and far away, like trying to remember a dream. Around him, other humans moved slowly and spoke quietly. The fire had gone out of them. The Kelvins shipped different groups to different parts of their empire. Hyun-woo found himself on a transport with 200 other humans, heading for something called Omega-7. Through the small windows, he could see they were traveling through space faster than anything humans had ever built. Stars stretched into lines of light as they jumped between systems. Omega-7 turned out to be a mining station built into a large asteroid. The corridors were carved from solid rock and lined with metal plates. The air was thin and tasted of metal and chemicals. Gravity was lighter than Earth's, making every step feel strange and floating. The work was simple but brutal. Humans operated massive drilling machines that ate through rock to reach deposits of rare metals. The machines were designed for beings much larger than humans, so operating them required constant strain and attention. The Kelvins had smaller machines that could do the same work, but they were expensive. Human slaves were cheaper. Hyun-woo was assigned to Drill Team 7 with 11 other humans. Their supervisor was a Kelvin named Vorth, who spoke to them through a translation device. Vorth treated them like living tools, useful but replaceable. When humans were injured or killed in accidents, new ones arrived on the next transport. The work shifts lasted 16 hours. The humans slept in dormitories carved from the asteroid stone, 40 people to a room on metal bunks stacked 3 high. Food came from machines that produced gray paste with all the nutrients needed to keep humans alive and working. It tasted like nothing and satisfied no one. But Hyunwoo began to notice things. Despite the neural dampeners, some humans seemed more alert than others. During their brief rest periods, he watched how people moved and talked. A few maintained better posture, made eye contact, and spoke with more energy. The dampeners were working, but not perfectly on everyone. Yoonji was one of these people. She had been assigned to maintain the drilling equipment, work that required her to move throughout the station. During their rare meetings in the corridors, she would nod to Hyunwoo or make brief eye contact. Small signs that the real person was still there under the dampener's effects. So Young operated a massive cargo hauler that moved ore from the drilling sites to the processing plants. Her job required quick reflexes and sharp thinking, skills that seemed to push against the dampener's control. Hyunwoo could see frustration in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Jaemin had perhaps the most important position among the humans. The Kelvins had discovered that humans were fragile compared to most species they enslaved, so they needed someone to keep the workers alive and healthy. Jaemin moved between work sites with a medical kit, treating injuries and illnesses. The Kelvins allowed this because dead slaves were worthless. 3 months passed. The routine never changed. Work, eat, sleep, work again. Humans died from accidents, exhaustion, and despair. New ones arrived to replace them. The Kelvins showed no more emotion about human deaths than they would about broken tools. But Hyunwoo was patient. He had learned patience in the Marines, waiting for the right moment to strike. He watched the guards' routines. He memorized the station's layout. He identified which humans seemed most resistant to the dampeners. Most importantly, he began to understand that the Kelvans had made a mistake. They had conquered Earth because humans were divided and unprepared. They controlled humans now with technology and neural dampeners, but they did not understand what they had captured. They saw humans as just another species to be enslaved, like dozens of others across their empire. They did not understand that humans were different, that when pushed to the edge, humans did not break. They bent, learned, and came back stronger. The Kelvins had taken everything from them, their world, their freedom, their families. But they had made one critical error. They had left them alive. As Hyunwoo lay on his metal bunk listening to the sounds of the station around him, he felt something stirring deep inside his mind. The neural dampener was still working, keeping his anger buried. But like water finding cracks in stone, human determination was slowly working its way through the artificial barriers in his brain. The Kelvins had named them slaves. They thought the matter was settled. They were wrong. 6 months had passed since the humans arrived at Omega-7. The mining station ran like a machine, with human slaves as its moving parts. But machines sometimes developed problems that their builders never expected. Yoonji Park discovered the first crack in the Kelvin system while repairing a drilling control unit. The neural dampener behind her ear had been giving her headaches for weeks, sharp pains that came and went without warning. As she worked on the complex circuitry, focused completely on solving the technical problem, the pain suddenly stopped. For a moment, she felt completely clear. The dull fog that had clouded her thoughts since the implant surgery lifted, and she could think with her old sharpness. The feeling lasted only a few seconds before the dampener reasserted control. But those seconds told her something important. The neural dampeners had a weakness. During her next medical check, she mentioned the headaches to Jaemin Lee. As the station's human medic, he was allowed to examine other humans and treat minor injuries. The Kelvins considered this more efficient than using their own medical staff on livestock. Others have reported the same thing, Jaemin told her quietly as he pretended to check her temperature. Headaches, moments of clarity, strange dreams. I think the dampeners are starting to fail. Jaemin had been keeping careful notes on human health and behavior. Hidden inside his official medical reports were observations the Kelvins would never think to look for. He had noticed that humans who had experienced severe trauma before their capture seemed more resistant to the dampeners. Former soldiers like Hyunwoo, people who had lost family members, anyone who had survived disaster, they all showed signs of fighting back against the neural control. The dampeners had been designed for Kelvin brain chemistry. The aliens had used them successfully on dozens of other species across their empire, but human brains were different in ways the Kelvins had not expected. The devices worked at first, suppressing emotions and independent thought. But human neural pathways were more flexible than those of other species. Over time, the brain found ways around the artificial barriers. More humans began to experience moments of clarity. So Young Choi felt it happen while she was operating her cargo hauler. For just an instant, she remembered what it felt like to fly through Earth's blue sky. And tears rolled down her face before the dampener regained control. Tae Ho Kang, a former factory worker who operated the ore crushers, had a flash of memory about his daughter and felt real love for the first time in months. These moments were brief and unpredictable, but they were growing stronger. Hyunwoo met Dong Hyun-yoon during a shift change in the main corridor. Dong Hyun had been special forces before the invasion, trained in survival and resistance techniques. Unlike most humans on the station, he still stood straight and moved with purpose. When their eyes met, Hyunwoo saw intelligence and awareness that the dampeners should have suppressed. "The machines in Section C make a lot of noise," Dong Hyun said casually as they passed. It seemed like an innocent comment, but Hyunwoo understood. Section C was where the old mining equipment was stored. The noise would cover conversations. They met there during the next rest period. Two other humans were already waiting: Mi Sun Han, who had been a psychologist in Seoul, and Ye Jin Song, a telecommunications specialist. All of them moved carefully and spoke quietly, but there was alertness in their eyes that should not have been possible. "The dampeners are weakening," Mi Sun explained. "I've been watching behavior patterns. Humans with strong emotional connections or traumatic memories show the most resistance. The device can't completely override our brain's natural healing processes." Ye Jin had made an even more important discovery. "I've been studying the communication systems while doing maintenance work. The Kelvins use quantum entanglement for instant communication across their empire, but the technology has limitations. Their security protocols assume no one else understands the technology. What does that mean for us?" Hyunwoo asked. "It means if we can access their communication arrays, we can contact humans on other stations and ships. The resistance doesn't have to be limited to Omega-7. They began meeting regularly, always in different locations, always careful not to establish patterns the Kelvins might notice. Mi-sun worked to identify other humans whose dampeners were failing. Dong Hyun memorized guard rotations and security procedures. Ye Jin studied the station's communication and computer systems. Hyunwoo mapped the station's layout and identified critical systems, but they all knew they needed more than just information. They needed to understand their enemy. Jaemin provided that understanding. His position as the human medic gave him access to Kelvin overseers when they needed medical attention for workplace injuries. He had learned to observe them carefully while treating their wounds. "They're not as strong as they look," he reported during one of their secret meetings. "Their bones are dense but brittle. A hard impact in the right place could cause serious fractures. And they have a symbiotic organism that lives in their bloodstream. It regulates their metabolism and immune system. Without it, they would die within hours." More importantly, he had discovered something about their sensory systems. They communicate partly through low-frequency vibrations. Sound in certain ranges causes them severe discomfort, maybe even pain. Our drilling equipment produces some of these frequencies by accident. This information opened up possibilities. The humans began to understand that their captors were not invincible. They had weaknesses that could be exploited if the humans could find a way to act on that knowledge. The breakthrough came when Sung-ho Im joined their group. He had been an aerospace engineer before the invasion and understood complex systems better than anyone else on the station. While maintaining the life support equipment, he had discovered something the Kelvins probably did not realize. "The station's systems are more interconnected than they think," he explained. "The mining equipment, life support, communications, and gravity control all share the same power distribution network. Someone with the right access could cause serious problems." "What kind of problems?" Dong Hyun asked. "The kind that would make the Kelvins very unhappy and give us opportunities to do things they wouldn't expect." As their resistance cell grew, they established rules for recruitment and security. New members had to be carefully evaluated to ensure their dampeners were truly failing. Communication was done through coded messages hidden in work reports or brief conversations in noisy areas. Everyone maintained their normal routines to avoid suspicion. The most important rule was patience. They all wanted to strike back immediately, but they knew they would only get one chance. If they moved too soon or made mistakes, The Kelvins would increase security and probably kill all the humans on the station. They had to wait for the right moment and prepare carefully. That preparation included gathering weapons and tools. Teho smuggled small pieces of metal and electronics from the ore processing plants. Yunji began modifying maintenance tools to serve as weapons. Yejin worked on understanding how to access the communication systems without triggering alarms. But the most important preparation was psychological. Misun worked with each member of their group to strengthen their resistance to the neural dampeners. She taught them meditation techniques and mental exercises that seemed to accelerate the process of breaking free from the device's control. The dampeners work by suppressing emotional responses, she explained. But emotion is tied to memory, and memory is tied to identity. The more we remember who we were before this happened, the harder it becomes for the machines to control us. They began sharing stories about their lives on Earth. Hyunwoo talked about his Marine unit and the pride he felt serving his country. Yoonji described the satisfaction of solving complex engineering problems. So-hyung recalled the freedom of flying above the clouds. These memories were like fuel for their resistance, strengthening their sense of self against the artificial fog of the dampeners. By the end of their 6th month on Omega-7, the resistance cell had grown to include 15 humans. They had detailed knowledge of the station's systems, weaknesses in Kelvin security, and most importantly, they had each other. The neural dampeners that should have kept them docile and obedient were failing more each day. The Kelvins noticed none of this. To them, the humans remained useful tools that performed their assigned tasks without complaint. They had conquered dozens of species using the same methods, and humans seemed no different from the others. But humans were different. They carried something their captors could not understand or control: the ability to hope, to remember, and to choose defiance even when victory seemed impossible. The Kelvins had planted the seeds of human resistance the moment they decided to enslave, rather than destroy them. Those seeds were starting to grow. The transport ship arrived at Omega-7 on a day that started like any other. Hyunwoo was operating Drill Unit 5 when the announcement came through the station's communication system. New workers were being delivered to replace humans who had died or become too weak to work effectively. What made this delivery different was the age of the new arrivals. Jae-min was the first to see them. As the station's medic, he was required to examine all new workers for diseases or injuries that might affect their productivity. When the transport's cargo bay opened, he saw 50 human children between the ages of 8 and 15. His hands shook as he completed the medical examinations. The children were thin and frightened, torn from Earth's orphanages and refugee camps where no one would miss them. They huddled together, trying to comfort each other in languages from around the world. Among them was Woojin Park, Yoonji's younger brother. He was 12 years old and still wore the school uniform he had been captured in. When Yoonji saw him during the processing, she nearly broke her careful disguise. Only Dong-hyun's quick hand on her shoulder kept her from running to the boy. The Kelvin overseer, Vorth, addressed the adult humans who had been gathered to witness the arrival. These young ones will be processed tomorrow. Neural dampeners will be installed, and they will begin light work duties. Their small size makes them useful for maintenance tasks in confined spaces. The words hit the adult humans like physical blows. Even through the dampener's effects, they felt something stirring deep inside their minds. These were children, innocent, helpless children who should be playing and learning, not enslaved and mutilated by alien machines. Mi-sun-han felt the dampener's control crack like ice under pressure. For the first time in months, she experienced pure, undiluted rage. Around her, other humans were having the same reaction. The careful emotional suppression that had kept them docile was breaking down under the force of protective instinct. That night, the resistance cell held an emergency meeting in the abandoned mining equipment storage area. All 15 members were there, and for the first time since their capture, they spoke without whispering. "We can't let this happen," Yoonji said. Her voice carried steel that had been missing for months. "I don't care about the plan or waiting for the right moment. Those are children." "She's right," Hyunwoo agreed. "We've been preparing for months. If we can't protect children, what are we fighting for?" Dong-hyun, always the tactician, tried to maintain perspective. "If we move tomorrow, we'll be acting on emotion instead of strategy. The Kelvins will be expecting some kind of reaction. Security will be heightened during the processing. Then we make that work for us, Yejin said. She had been quiet during most of their meetings, but now her voice carried confidence. I've been studying their communication protocols. During the processing, most of their attention will be focused on the medical bay. That's when their systems will be most vulnerable. Seong-ho nodded. And I can use the distraction to access the main power distribution network. If we're going to do this, we should do it completely. Hit them everywhere at once. The plan they developed was simple but dangerous. During the children's processing, Yejin would access the communication array and send coded messages to humans on other Kelvan facilities. Seong-ho would sabotage the station's power systems to create chaos and confusion. Yoonji would disable the processing equipment to prevent the neural dampener implantation. The others would secure weapons and take control of key areas of the station. It was risky and probably suicidal, but none of them hesitated. Something fundamental had changed in the last few hours. The sight of those frightened children had awakened something in the human prisoners that the neural dampeners could no longer suppress. The next morning arrived gray and cold, like every morning on Omega-7. The children were brought to the medical bay in small groups while adult humans were ordered to continue their normal work duties. But beneath the routine, tension was building like pressure in a sealed container. Jae-min was assigned to assist with the processing, supposedly to monitor the children's health during the procedure. In reality, he would be in position to help when the rebellion began. As he prepared the medical equipment, his hands were steady despite the hammering of his heart. The first group of children was brought in at 800 hours. Woo Jin was among them, trying to be brave for the younger ones but clearly terrified. When he saw Jae-min, the boy's eyes widened with recognition and hope. The Kelvin medical technician began preparing the neural dampener devices with mechanical efficiency. To them, this was just another routine procedure, no different from implanting dampeners in adult humans or any other species. They could not understand why the adult humans in other parts of the station were showing elevated stress indicators. At 0827 hours, Yejin accessed the communication array from a maintenance terminal in Section D. Her fingers flew over the alien interface as she broadcast a coded message to every Kelvin facility within range. The children cry for home. The mothers answer. The fire spreads. At 0828 hours, Seong-ho triggered a cascade failure in the power distribution network. Emergency lighting flickered throughout the station as primary systems went offline. Backup power engaged automatically, but it would take time for the Kelvins to diagnose and repair the damage. At 0829 hours, Yoonji smashed the neural dampener implantation device with a piece of heavy mining equipment. Sparks flew as the delicate machinery shattered, and alarms began sounding throughout the medical bay. At 0830 hours, the rebellion began. The moment Yoonji destroyed the machine, something broke loose in every human on the station. The neural dampeners, already weakened by months of gradual failure, finally collapsed under the combined force of rage, desperation, and protective fury. For the first time since their capture, the humans felt their full emotional range return. The effect was immediate and devastating. Hyun-woo, who had been pretending to work in the main corridor, grabbed a plasma cutter from a nearby toolkit and turned it on the nearest Kelvin guard. The alien's look of surprise was almost comical. In 6 months, no human had shown the slightest aggression. The plasma beam cut through the guard's torso before it could react. Throughout the station, similar scenes played out as humans turned their tools and equipment into weapons. Taeho used an ore crusher to flatten a Kelvin overseer. So-young rammed her cargo hauler into a group of guards, crushing them against a wall. Mi-sun led a group of humans in a coordinated attack on the security station, using their knowledge of the facility's layout to outmaneuver the confused aliens. The Kelvins had based their security procedures on 6 months of human docility. They were completely unprepared for the sudden transformation of their slaves into an army of vengeful fighters. Their superior technology meant nothing when humans were fighting with the desperation of cornered animals and the intelligence of natural predators. In the medical bay, Jae-min grabbed Woo Jin and the other children, pulling them away from the chaos as Kelvin technicians tried to understand what was happening. Eunji appeared in the doorway, her maintenance coverall splattered with alien blood, carrying a Kelvin energy weapon she had taken from a dead guard. "Get them out of here," she shouted over the sound of alarms and weapon fire. "Head for Section G. Dong Hyun is securing that area." The fighting spread through the station like wildfire. Humans who had been beaten down and controlled for months suddenly rediscovered their capacity for violence and cunning. They knew the station's layout better than their captors. They understood the equipment and systems the Kelvins depended on. Most importantly, they fought with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose. By 1,000 hours, the humans controlled most of Omega-7. The few surviving Kelvins had barricaded themselves in the command center, sending desperate messages to their fleet command. But Yejin had already compromised their communication systems, and the messages were being intercepted and scrambled. Hyunwoo found Vorth, the overseer who had announced the children's processing, hiding in a storage compartment. The alien looked up at him with its large, dark eyes, and for a moment Hyunwoo felt something like pity. Then he remembered 6 months of slavery, of watching humans die from exhaustion and despair, of children being prepared for neural mutilation. The pity disappeared. When the fighting ended, 47 Kelvins were dead. 3 humans had died in the battle and 8 more were seriously injured. But the station was theirs and the children were safe. As the humans gathered in the main assembly area, many of them were still shaking from the sudden return of their suppressed emotions. Some wept for lost friends and family. Others laughed with the relief of finally fighting back. All of them felt the intoxicating rush of freedom. But Donghyun, ever practical, reminded them that their victory was just the beginning. "They'll send ships to retake the station," he said. "We have maybe hours before they arrive with enough force to overwhelm us. We need to decide what we're going to do next." Hyunwoo looked around at the faces of his fellow rebels, former slaves who had found their strength and courage again. "We're going to fight," he said simply. "We're going to send a message to every human in Kelvin space that resistance is possible, and we're going to make these aliens regret the day they decided to enslave humanity." The spark had been lit. Now they would see how the first Kelvin response ships arrived at Omega-7 18 hours after the rebellion began. They came expecting to find a minor uprising that could be quickly suppressed. Instead, they found an asteroid turned into a fortress, bristling with weapons that should not have existed. Seung-ho had been busy during those 18 hours. Using his knowledge of aerospace engineering and the station's mining equipment, he had converted the massive ore-moving magnetic launchers into weapons capable of hurling chunks of asteroid at significant fractions of light speed. When the Kelvin ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, they found themselves under immediate attack. The first ship took a 50-ton iron asteroid fragment through its main hull before its captain could even comprehend what was happening. The second ship managed to raise its shields but was hammered by a continuous barrage of projectiles that overwhelmed its defenses within minutes. The third ship, seeing the destruction of its companions, tried to retreat but found its engines disabled by precise strikes from weapons that had been mining equipment the day before. Yejin, meanwhile, had been using the captured communication systems to broadcast the coded rebellion signal across the Kelvan Empire. Her message was simple but effective. The children cry for home. The mothers answer. The fire spreads. The response was immediate and widespread. On Factory Station Theta 9, human workers led by a former shipyard foreman named Chan-Woo Lee seized control of the facility's computer networks. Chan-Woo had been a hacker before the invasion, and his skills translated perfectly to alien systems once his neural dampener failed. Within hours, he had turned the factory's automated assembly lines into weapons production facilities. On agricultural world Kepler-7, humans working in the vast farming complexes used their knowledge of chemical processes to create explosives from fertilizer and industrial solvents. Led by a former military strategist named Hee-Won Kim, they coordinated simultaneous attacks on Kelvin administrative centers across 3 continents. On mining ship Gravitas, former demolitions expert Jun Seo Park turned the ship's ore refinement systems into a massive bomb. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away and took out an entire Kelvin patrol fleet that had been investigating reports of equipment malfunctions. The pattern was the same everywhere. Humans who had been considered harmless laborers suddenly revealed themselves to be creative, adaptive, and devastatingly effective fighters. The Kelvins had made the mistake of keeping humans around their most critical infrastructure while underestimating their capacity for innovation and destruction. What made the rebellion even more effective was its unpredictability. Where other conquered species had followed logical patterns of resistance that Kelvin military doctrine could counter, humans refused to fight by any recognizable rules. They used everything as weapons, from farming equipment to communications arrays to the very air circulation systems that kept stations habitable. On Omega-7, Hyunwoo had transformed from a broken slave into the leader of a growing resistance movement. The station had become a coordination center for human uprisings across the Empire, with Yejin managing communications and Dong-hyun organizing tactical support for rebel groups on other worlds. The children who had sparked the rebellion were kept safe in the most protected areas of the station, but they also served an important purpose. Their presence reminded every human fighter what they were protecting and why surrender was not an option. Yoonji had become the rebellion's chief engineer, working with teams of humans to reverse engineer captured Kelvin technology. What they learned was both encouraging and terrifying. Kelvin equipment was advanced but not magical. It followed physical laws that humans could understand and exploit. More importantly, it was designed to be operated by Kelvins, whose psychology made them predictable and systematic. Humans were neither predictable nor systematic. They build everything with multiple redundancies and fail-safes. Yoonji explained to the resistance leadership during one of their planning sessions, but they also assume their technology will be used logically and safely. They never considered what would happen if someone deliberately caused cascading failures or used their equipment in ways it wasn't designed for. This insight led to the development of new tactics that spread throughout the human resistance. Rather than trying to match Kelvin technology with superior weapons, humans began using the aliens' own systems against them in ways their creators never imagined. Communication networks became surveillance tools that let humans monitor Kelvin fleet movements. Transportation systems were reprogrammed to deliver explosive packages instead of cargo. Even life support systems were weaponized, with humans altering atmospheric composition to create toxic environments for their former captors. The psychological impact on the Kelvins was devastating. For 3 centuries, their empire had expanded through methodical conquest and efficient management of slave populations. They understood how to fight other militaries and how to control conquered peoples. But they had never faced an enemy that turned everyday tools into weapons and treated their infrastructure as a battlefield. Reports flooded in to Kelvin High Command from across the Empire. Food processing plants exploding, communication arrays broadcasting human propaganda, transport ships disappearing with their cargo of fresh slaves. The humans weren't just rebelling. They were systematically dismantling the economic and logistical foundations of Kelvin civilization. Admiral Queth, commander of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, summarized the situation in a report to the Empire's ruling council. The humans do not fight like any species we have previously encountered. They show no regard for conventional tactics or acceptable losses. They appear to prefer mutual destruction over surrender, and they adapt to our countermeasures faster than our strategic computers can model. The Admiral's report included recordings from the attack on Omega-7, showing humans using mining equipment to destroy military vessels worth more than entire planetary economies. They converted industrial tools into weapons with an effectiveness rating of 847% above projected parameters. Our analysts cannot explain how they achieved such results with primitive improvisation. But the most disturbing part of the report dealt with human behavior. The slave population shows no signs of demoralization despite suffering severe casualties. If anything, losses appear to increase their aggressiveness and tactical innovation. This psychological profile does not match any known sapient species. On Omega-7, Hyunwoo was reading intercepted copies of these same reports with grim satisfaction. The Kelvins were beginning to understand what they had awakened, but their comprehension was too little and too late. They're pulling back their frontier fleets, Dong-hyun reported during their morning briefing, consolidating their forces around core systems and major military installations. Good, said Hyewan, who had escaped from Kepler-7 and made her way to Omega-7 along with other resistance leaders. When they cluster their ships together, they make better targets. Hyewan had brought with her detailed intelligence about Kelvin military doctrine and strategic thinking. Her analysis of their response patterns allowed the human resistance to stay one step ahead of their former captors' countermeasures. They're treating this like a conventional rebellion, she explained. They expect us to consolidate territory, establish defensive positions, and try to hold ground. They don't understand that we're not trying to build an empire, we're trying to burn theirs down. The strategy was working. Rather than trying to hold captured facilities, human rebels would strip them of useful equipment and then destroy them, denying the Kelvins any chance to reclaim valuable infrastructure. This approach meant human forces remained mobile and unpredictable, while their enemies were forced into increasingly desperate defensive postures. As the rebellion entered its third month, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. The Kelvins still possessed superior technology and greater numbers, but they were fighting a war they didn't understand against an enemy that refused to follow any logical pattern. Human ingenuity had turned every Kelvin advantage into a vulnerability. Their advanced computers could be hacked by humans who thought outside their programming parameters. Their energy weapons could be overloaded by simple modifications that no Kelvin engineer would consider safe or rational. Their faster-than-light communications could be jammed by broadcasting patterns that triggered feedback loops in their quantum entanglement networks. Most importantly, human determination had proven stronger than Kelvin control systems. The neural dampeners that had successfully suppressed dozens of other species had failed completely against human psychology. The aliens had learned too late that enslaving humans was like trying to contain fire with paper walls. Standing on the observation deck of Omega-7, looking out at the debris field where 3 Kelvin fleets had been destroyed, Hyunwoo felt something he had not experienced since Earth's conquest. Hope. The fires of human rebellion were spreading across the galaxy, and the Kelvin Empire was beginning to burn. But the war was far from over. The aliens still controlled hundreds of worlds and possessed weapons that could sterilize entire planets. If humanity was going to survive and win, they would need to take the fight. The assault on the Kelvin home system began with a fleet that should not have existed. 200 ships approached the heavily defended core worlds, their hulls a patchwork of human engineering and captured alien technology. Leading them was the former Kelvin flagship Eternal Dominion, now renamed Liberation and commanded by the same humans who had once been its slaves. Hyunwoo stood on the bridge that had once belonged to Admiral Queth. The Kelvin officer's body lay in the ship's morgue alongside thousands of others, victims of the human uprising that had swept through the Empire like a cleansing fire. Around him, human crew members operated stations designed for beings twice their size, their modifications and improvisations giving the ancient warship capabilities its builders never imagined. The past year had transformed the galaxy. What began as scattered slave rebellions had become a coordinated campaign of liberation that shattered the Kelvin Empire's military power. Human forces had captured or destroyed over 60% of the alien fleet, turning their own ships and technology against them with devastating effectiveness. But this final assault would be different. The Kelvins had pulled back their remaining forces to defend their home system, creating a fortress of overlapping shields, defensive platforms, and automated weapons that surrounded their birth world like a shell of metal and energy. Breaking through those defenses would require everything the humans had learned about warfare, sacrifice, and the price of freedom. Long-range sensors show 300 Kelvin ships in defensive formation around their primary world, reported Yejin from the communication station. They're broadcasting surrender offers on all frequencies. Hyunwoo almost smiled at that. After a year of total war, the Kelvins still didn't understand their enemy. They offered to negotiate, to find some compromise that would allow both species to coexist. They could not comprehend that humans were not interested in negotiation or coexistence with those who had enslaved their children. Any response from the civilian populations we've liberated? He asked. Affirmative, Yejin replied. Representatives from 47 species confirm they're ready to participate in the final assault. The Drekmari are providing their fleet of mining ships converted to weapons platforms. The Zephyrians are contributing their expertise in electronic warfare. Everyone wants to be part of ending this. The liberation of other enslaved species had been an unexpected development in the human rebellion. As human forces captured Kelvin facilities, they had discovered that humans were not the only victims of the Empire's expansion. Dozens of intelligent species had been enslaved over the centuries, their civilizations destroyed and their people reduced to labor units. Unlike humans, most of these species had accepted their fate and worked without resistance. The neural dampeners had been completely effective on them, suppressing their will to fight until they became perfect slaves. But when human rebels destroyed the control systems and offered these species their freedom, the response had been overwhelming. The Drakmari were silicon-based beings from a high-gravity world, naturally suited for mining operations. Under Kelvin rule, they had spent centuries extracting rare minerals from asteroid belts. When humans freed them and offered to teach them warfare, they had proven surprisingly capable students. The Zephyrians were energy beings who existed partly in electromagnetic fields. The Kelvins had used them to maintain computer networks and communication systems. Free once again, they became invaluable allies in electronic warfare and cyber attacks against their former masters. Other species contributed their own unique abilities to the liberation effort. The aquatic Narellans proved excellent at underwater operations. The insectoid Clixians were natural engineers who could repair and modify technology with incredible speed. The gaseous Vorthak could infiltrate sealed environments where solid beings could not survive. What united all these species was their shared hatred of the Kelvins and their gratitude to the humans who had given them the chance for revenge. They had learned from their liberators that freedom was worth any sacrifice and that some crimes could only be answered with total destruction. All fleet elements report ready, announced Dong-hyun from the tactical station. Haiwan's battle plan is loaded into all ship systems. Attack groups are in position. Hyeon Kim had become the Liberation Fleet's primary strategist, her understanding of both human psychology and alien technology, making her invaluable in planning complex operations. Her plan for the assault on the Kelvin home system was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. Rather than trying to punch through the defensive shell around the planet, the human fleet would use the Kelvin's own psychology against them. The aliens thought in terms of logical defensive strategies and calculated responses. They would expect the humans to attack the strongest points first, trying to create gaps in their defenses. Instead, the humans would attack everywhere at once. Begin Phase 1, Hyunwoo ordered. Across the system, 200 human ships and their alien allies began a coordinated assault on every Kelvan defensive position simultaneously. The converted mining ships opened fire with ore launcher weapons that hurled asteroids at fractional light speed. The captured warships used their own weapons against their former masters, their human crews pushing the systems beyond safe operational limits. The electronic warfare specialists, led by Chanwoo Lee, launched cyber attacks that turned the Kelvin's own defensive networks against them. Automated weapons platforms began firing on each other as their targeting systems were compromised. Communication networks collapsed under the weight of false signals and feedback loops, but the most devastating attacks came from the former slaves who knew Kelvin technology better than anyone else. Yoonji had spent the past year studying every piece of captured equipment, learning not just how it worked but how it could be made to fail catastrophically. Her knowledge had been distributed throughout the fleet, turning every human engineer into an expert in alien sabotage. The Kelvan defensive grid, built over centuries and considered impregnable, began to collapse within hours. Shields flickered and failed as their power systems were overloaded by signals they had never been designed to handle. Weapons platforms exploded as their ammunition storage was triggered by remotely activated mining charges. Command ships found their computer cores infected with viruses that turned their own systems into weapons against them. Kelvin fleet is breaking formation, reported So Young from the helm. They're falling back to the inner system defense grid. Then we follow them, Hyunwoo said. Signal all ships advance to Phase 2. Phase 2 involved close-quarters combat, where human advantages in adaptability and improvisation would be most effective. The Liberation Fleet drove deep into the Kelvin formation, their ships modified for maximum maneuverability and equipped with weapons designed for devastating close-range attacks. Seung-ho had turned the Liberation's mining lasers into ship-killing, weapons that could cut through even Kelvin armor plating. Jun Seo's expertise with explosives had created missile warheads that used captured Kelvin technology to create matter-antimatter reactions of terrifying power. Taeho had modified the cargo bays to serve as launch platforms for boarding pods filled with human assault troops. The battle became a nightmare of twisted metal and explosive decompression as 200 human ships tore through the heart of the Kelvin fleet. The aliens' superior numbers meant nothing when their enemies were willing to ram their ships into critical, targets or detonate their own power cores to take out multiple enemy vessels, but it was the boarding actions that truly broke Kelvin morale. Human soldiers, trained in techniques developed from a year of rebellion and warfare, proved devastating in ship-to-ship combat. They moved through Kelvin vessels like hunters, using their knowledge of alien psychology and technology to turn every corridor into a killing field. Jae-min led one of the medical teams that followed the assault troops, but his mission was not to heal. His year of studying Kelvin biology had given him knowledge of their vulnerabilities that proved invaluable in combat. He had developed weapons specifically designed to exploit the aliens' dependence on their symbiotic organisms and their sensitivity to certain frequencies. Kelvin flagship is requesting quarter, Yejin reported as the battle raged around them. Admiral Vex is offering to surrender the entire fleet in exchange for safe passage. Tell him no, Hyunwoo replied without hesitation. There is no quarter for slavers. The refusal to accept surrender sent a message throughout the Kelvin fleet. The humans had not come to negotiate or to claim territory. They had come to end the Kelvin Empire completely and permanently. Faced with this implacable determination, Kelvin resistance began to crumble. Ships that had fought for hours suddenly stopped firing. Crews abandoned their posts and fled for the escape pods. Entire formations broke apart as their commanders realized that no victory was possible against an enemy that preferred mutual destruction to defeat. By the end of the day, the space around the Kelvin homeworld was filled with the debris of their once mighty fleet. Fewer than 30 alien ships remained functional, and most of those were trying to flee the system rather than continue fighting. All Kelvin orbital defenses have been neutralized, reported Haiwan.